because you said right at the top, we're not a monastic religion. We're not a monastic tradition. But at the same time, one could say, look, what you're saying, Sheikh, is we shouldn't play the game. Politics or finance, and the whole setup that we've got today, where money is this kind of figment of people's imagination that is given the power, given value because of whatever the state says. So we're kind of on the chessboard of I guess modernity. At a certain level we need to play the game, and so how do we navigate what level we go to?
Well, that will depend on individual circumstances. Very often people have to take jobs of a particular kind and live in places where their work takes them. Islam is realistic and not absolute or utopian in these things. Ideally, if offered a choice between two forms of employment, you should be able to see which of them is less spiritually destructive and less environmentally destructive. And you should choose that, even if it means a pay cut, because you'll just be happier that way. And you'll also be pushing back against the kind of juggernaut that is entropically running downhill towards some kind of global calamity that is starting to look more and more actual. Not just climate collapse, but nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, many other scientific innovations to do with genetic manipulation that are increasingly becoming threatening to human beings. Modernity is a threatening thing rather than a healing thing. 100 years ago it might have looked different. Now we have a range of new, enormously well understood and powerful technologies, any of which could eliminate the species. And it's very interesting to see that the serious philosophers the last 20 or 30 years have moved away from the old idea of progress and we're getting better and the future will be better, to how do we put the brakes on and how do we protect ourselves from these existential risks?
Before it's too late.
Before it will be too late. So for instance, Martin Rees, who's the professor of mathematics at the University of Cambridge, has a book called Our Final Century. He thinks each chapter is about one of these new technologies, and he thinks the chances are that one of them will wipe out the human race within the next 100 years. So we have a Centre for the Study of Existential Risks, so everybody is anxious. Stephen Hawking here in Cambridge said, stop AI research right away because of the so-called Terminator scenario. It's looking more and more as if our cleverness is outstripping our wisdom in ways that eventually may destroy us. It's one of the theories for why there is no intelligent life in outer space, even though they've been looking at it for so long. The theory is that civilizations reach a point at which their technical cleverness enables them to destroy themselves.
Ah, interesting.
And therefore there are no really advanced civilizations out there because they've had their nuclear holocaust or their Grey Goose scenario or whatever it might be, and it's just a matter of time before secular humanity reaches the same point.
Unless we heed the warning, unless you've got a system that has a kind of automatic,
Yes, but the problem is, this claims to be the age of reason. This is what we were told after the Enlightenment. Religion, superstition, tradition, irrational. We're going to go with ratio, with reason. But the way we're living today, our economic system, our technologies, they're very irrational because at the moment we are not heading for carbon net zero. In fact, we're heading almost certainly for a global climate catastrophe, but still the politicians won't do anything about this because they won't get re-elected. So this isn't actually a civilization based on reason, because what is more unreasonable than pursuing policies that you know are going to cause a global meltdown? But it's what they're doing.
Absolutely. So Sheikh, on this, we from a VC perspective, like a venture capital perspective, I feel like trying to achieve carbon net zero, the only two places where this could be achieved is not politicians, is cutting edge science, and then also crazy venture capitalists who will put the money there to be able to achieve that. So I feel like if we use finance and business for good, it can actually really help the world.
Yes, but I don't see that that is at the moment in any danger of happening on the required scale. Instead, Mr. Musk and others are investing in enormously climate-destroying rockets because he thinks we can go and live in Mars because this planet is finished. That's the kind of level of discourse that it's at. In other words, you abandon this planet to go and live on another planet that's already been destroyed by climate change. That's his dream.
Yeah.
But at the moment, I don't see that there are technologies swimming into practical life any time in our lifetimes, even panaceas like nuclear fusion and so forth, that really are going to come on stream before the real catastrophes begin. And remember, the countries that are most vulnerable are usually Muslim countries.
Yeah.
The melting of the Himalayan ice cap is already starting to produce uncontrollable floods in Pakistan and Bangladesh, and it'll only get worse.
Yeah.
The Middle East is the region of the world most threatened by climate change.
Yeah.
So the West, in Cambridge, 30 years I'll be able to grow oranges in my garden, be quite nice. But by that time, 90% of the agriculture of Algeria will have gone.
Wow.
So you're talking about massive population movements, climate change refugees, a situation that may well make the global setup as it exists today completely unsustainable.
So, Sheikh, what about? I mean, this is a hard left turn from where we're going. But what role do you think Islam has to present as an alternative? And thinking about, in particular, structures of power, finance. If you've been left in charge, Shaykh Abdul Hakim Murad. How do we change things around?
Well, there would be a lot of technologies that would simply have to be curtailed or stopped altogether, particularly those that are presenting a real existential threat to all of humanity. There would have to be very swingeing penalties placed on hydrocarbon production and consumption. There would have to be massive subsidies for renewables until it would be crazy to use anything else. That's as the technologies for sustainable technologies improve, becoming more and more feasible. There would have to be, ultimately, I think, a sea change in our deep philosophical understanding of what human beings are for. There's no point in telling people to follow the path of zuhud, renunciation, and telling them that over $1 billion they'll get less happy until they have some alternative horizon. Human beings, for 99% of their history, have focused on the transcendent, on the sacred. The earliest human artifacts indicate that there were religious beliefs back then and belief in life after death, grave goods and so forth. That's normal to us. It's part of normal brain function. We're so far from that now that we don't know how sustainable our current levels of cognition might be. We're probably just at the beginning of the mental health pandemic that we're seeing now, and also the social breakdown that comes from intense individualism. We're now the first country in the world to have a ministry of loneliness. They only do that because it's a real pandemic. Over 9 million people in this country have medically significant levels of loneliness. This is not what the Enlightenment promised, but if you unleash the principle of individualism and say no to tradition, collectivity, parishes, family, extended families, and the individual is the measure of all things, I feel like this, I want to be that, I want to self-identify as the other, then you're going to have an atomized society of individuals who are increasingly disconnected from each other, which is what we're seeing, which adds to the spiral of mental health issues with a quarter of the US population now on antidepressants and the number rising constantly. It's not what the Enlightenment thought. They thought getting rid of religion would unleash new horizons for human happiness and functionality, but it's not looking like that at all.
And what would you do to the banks? What would you do to the existing, people who are, in charge?
Collective repentance, tawbah, sackcloth and ashes. Tell them to walk barefoot to Canterbury or to Benares or wherever it is that they claim to have their spiritual home, flogging themselves. They've got the world's money, and the world is in a mess, so put two and two together. not a good system. And of course, the ridiculous parasitical creation of capital on capital on capital and loans on cash that hasn't been created yet, and those strange kind of future derivative worlds, that is obviously completely ruled out by any realistic understanding of Sharia, and that is precisely the kind of growth, yarbu, riba, of money out of nothing, which everybody has condemned, from sort of Aristotle to Aquinas to the Quran. Riba is forbidden, and we can see why nowadays. Not just the instability of the financial markets, but the indebtedness of the population, the increasing disparity between rich and poor. However you define the current financial system, it's not performing well on any level,
Yep.
except for a few bankers who have their Manhattan penthouses and indifferent to the down and outs on the street below. But no ethical system could possibly endorse it. And there's no sign that within its own logic there are mechanisms that are self-corrective. It just feeds on its own dysfunction.
And so